atomic and subatomic and galactic structure of things today. Inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a 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 business. It is one of the most ingenious scams and social manipulation ever created, and at its core, it is an invisible war against the population. Debt is the weapon used to conquer and enslave societies. Debt is the weapon used to conquer and enslave societies. structure of things today. is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a 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 business. It is one of the most ingenious scams for social manipulation ever created, and at its core, it is an invisible war against the population. Debt is the weapon used to conquer and enslave society. Debt is the weapon used to conquer and enslave society.
Hello everybody, welcome to Habibi Kiosk, down home Munich, funky town, the best address in town, Maximilianstraße. It's the noblest place, the most noble place you can get in Munich town, and this is where we are sitting now in Habibi Kiosk, and I have guests. This will be in English because we have a guest from the United States. He's already positioned in front of his computer. It's DeForrest Brown Jr. And I have Peter Wacha here from Munich, and they are both involved in the techno scene. DeForrest Brown Jr. is an Alabama-raised ex-American rhythm analyst, writer, and representative of the Make Techno Black Again movement. He produces digital audio and extended media as speaker music. His work explores the links between the black experience in industrialized labor systems and black innovation in electronic music. He has lectured at Spotify for Artists, Colab Brown University, Yale University, and has written for Artforum, NPR, Mixmag, and on and on and on. I could read for a long time here what DeForrest Brown has done. But the most important thing is that he's writing a book, or he already wrote it, but we are still waiting for the book. It's called Assembling a Black Counterculture, and it will be published in summer, I guess, or yes, and we are waiting for it, and we are very curious to read the book. And Peter Wacha is from Munich, and the most people in Munich know him. He founded one of the first independent record stores I guess in Europe. In Germany, of course, it's Optimal record store. And then he got into the club scene, and he did the Ultraschall Club here in Munich, long years. And this was very important for the electronic dance music scene in Munich. And then he founded several labels, Disko B, for example. And now he's running the Rote Sonne Club in Munich, which is also a very important place for electronic dance music. And he's a DJ too. And not only that, he knows the scene and is a good friend of mine, and I am very, very glad to have both people here beside me so we can discuss this issue. The reason why I came to this issue is we have a radio station here in Munich, it's called Zündfunk, and they have a Facebook group, and there one of the journalists of Zündfunk posted a review of your ideas, DeForrest, and I was very, very astonished as I saw all the comments, and the people were very excited about the issue, and the issue was like the black roots of techno, and I realized that the people here were not common with this issue, and there were a lot of questions, but also a lot of aggressive comments. So I thought it could be interesting to talk about this topic to clear up this history of techno a bit, because even me, I didn't know about that connection because I ignored techno. I'm a totally anti-techno type of guy, because I didn't know much of it about it. I was more into hip hop and funk and soul then, and techno was just not so interesting for me, because I just saw what the development of techno here in Europe, and this was like Union Move in Munich and Love Parade in Berlin, and there was something missing for me. And after I wrote about you, DeForrest, I realized that, okay, this is the missing link for me. But Peter, for example, Upstart, like we call him, for him the link was always there. And maybe these three perspectives could be interesting to clear up this topic a bit. So I want to start with DeForrest, with you. You consider yourself as an ex-American rhythm analyst. What do you mean by ex-American? Are you ex-American? Which citizenship do you have?
Thanks for asking that. Well, for one, I identify as an ex-American due to the 400 years of, we'll just talk about the institution of slavery for one, and the way in which Black people, according to the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment of our Constitution, which were, installed around the 1860s during the Civil War that happened here. Black people essentially are not human. We're something to the American government, or something similar to like an NFT or a just open labor. And this has affected voting rights and the ability to move, the ability to receive healthcare, the ability to start independent businesses, education, for the entirety of America's history. And that's still playing out right now post the 2020 George Floyd murder protests. And if you've kept up at all or can, see it all, the sort of like anti-critical race theory debates that have been happening in America through a Koch brothers funded, campaign and crusade that has been taken up by the right wing. This is, as a Southern American, as someone from Alabama, my parents, my family is from, if you've ever seen those images of like the Jim Crow era, like kind of civil rights movement protests with Martin Luther King, where people were getting hosed down and like, or, biting people. It's that was my family. That's where I'm from. And after Martin Luther King was assassinated in, I believe it's like 1967, there was this wave of integration that happened across America that did not happen in the South. And the voting rights that Martin Luther King was fighting for, the labor rights, are still things that are playing out today. If you look at the Amazon Fulfillment Center in Bessemer, Alabama, which is my neighborhood, if you, I can go on and on about the sort of crimes against human rights. But yeah, that's why I identify as ex-American. And I think the understanding of the institution of race and racial capitalism in America is quite central to the conversation around techno and the way in which it was able to be financialized in a foreign country where, around 29 million people were able to immigrate post-World War II into our society and benefit from the free market. So, yeah.
So I read about you that you said once that you went to New York from Alabama, and the reason why you went there was you wanted to know white people because you didn't know some. Is this a joke or?
No, I literally, and I realize I actually have to say this more when talking. I grew up in a segregated environment. That Birmingham, Alabama is still segregated. You can literally drive a few miles across a mountain. There's literally a mountain that divides the white population from the black population. And I live in an area or a region of the country that's called the Black Belt, which was named by Booker T. Washington, who designed Tuskegee University. Like brilliant engineer, capitalist. But where I come from, things are segregated. I did not meet white people en masse. And by en masse, I mean more than maybe 10 white people at a time until around 2004. And I was born in 1990.
Yeah.
And I moved to New York because I wanted to see essentially the future. And my mom is actually from New York. Again, after Martin Luther King was assassinated, a lot of my family migrated up north. And these sort of migration patterns from the South, again, determines why there would be Black people in Detroit, Michigan in the first place. And so, yeah, that's actually why that's kind of important here, is to maybe lay out some of the lived experience of Black Americans and within this talk, actually explain why a techno would even happen and come from a group of people.
Yes, that's your perspective and your background. That's very interesting to know, because you also say that for you the party is the trap. This is what I read. So I found this very interesting because the party is the center of this movement. So that's how I received it from the far, and I found one quote of Jeff Mills, who is the founder of Underground Resistance, the label, and is a very
not true.
Not?
Oh, it's Mike Banks.
Okay.
It's Mike Banks.
Well, he was there with them.
Okay.
It's
Okay, but he was a member of.
Yeah, they were stick together. We were some kind of family together.
Okay.
Jeff did his own stuff.
Okay.
He did a radio station, and Mike Banks, he started Underground Resistance.
Okay, thank you. This is, I don't know everything. I just researched it, but the quote is like Jeff Mills said, techno wasn't designed to be dance music. It was designed to be a futurist statement.
Mm-hmm.
And this was very interesting for me to know. And I would like to know what you think about it, DeForrest.
Yeah, I can't find it in my stack of books at the moment. It may be in my other room.
As long as
But-
you look for, I have to do a correction again. Underground Resistance as the act. Yeah?
Okay.
It's a label
Yeah.
and the act.
And the act,
at
I know,
the
yeah.
act. First Underground Resistance, you're right. It was Mike Banks, Jeff Mills, and Robert Hood in
Yes.
one band. It was a
Okay.
live set that called Underground Resistance. So they split it off, and Robert Hood did his own thing, and Jeff Mills did his own thing, and Mike Banks mainly ran the label and started the distribution and so on.
Yes, this was Mad
This-
Mike Banks, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
This explanation is actually quite important to your question about techno being a futurist statement, because I mean, one of the reasons Jeff Mills and Robert split off is because Mike Banks had already, I don't think people realize he was in Parliament Funkadelic as like a touring guitarist and had worked with George Clinton, who was working at Motown. And I often try to explain to people that Detroit has a 200-year-long history that exists. You know, Detroit was around long before techno. And within the 20th century, the entirety of the 20th century is consistently like an evolution of Black music from, you know, the Black Bottom neighborhood, where we kind of received some of the first recordings of blues and jazz, but also how that sort of evolved into Motown, which I consider to be an electronic music, where you have like Berry Gordy, who worked for I believe it was Ford. Yeah, he worked for the Ford motor plant and was actually trying to design, you know, one size fit design, what he called the music of young America. And it was a studio music that consisted of a lot of engineers, that consisted of a lot of spatial design, you know, within the stereo field. There was a lot of actual electronic work that was being done at the exact same time as Stockhausen, if you will, that I don't think people would consider to be electronic music. But regardless, you know, the fact that Mike Banks had already experienced the American music industry through Motown and, you know, was sort of wanting to take that model, and Juan Atkins was doing a similar thing of taking these large band ensembles and the idea of a large studio setting and the monetization and assembly of music and crunching it down to a few machines and a single person is the futurist statement. I mean, Alvin Toffler, the futurist Alvin Toffler kind of calls that standardization and specialization. And Jeff Mills and Robert Hood had the idea after electronic music blew up in Europe throughout the 90s, that they would jump into the DJ scene and be sort of placeholders to be, we'll call them totems that remind people that Detroit has had a hand in techno, and to be Black representatives. For the record, Robert Hood currently lives in Alabama as a preacher, not too far from the college where Sun Ra and my parents went to school. So,
I mean, Alvin Toffler, which you reminded me, he wrote a book called The Third Wave in 1970.
yeah.
Yeah. It's an important book. And there's one quote I found like that where he says that the techno rebels, he speaks about the techno rebels, and that already in 1970. And he said that they found a new way of looking at technology. Is this meant like finding a human way to look at technology? And maybe this is also an impulse for the movement of or for the development of this music.
Yeah, there's a few things going on here with Toffler, because for one, the Third Wave actually came out in 1980. It was his book it was the sequel to the book Future Shock that came out in 1970, which is a funny kind of thing that he would write a book about being shocked by the future before actually sort of writing a book that would construct the mechanisms under which we, as a society, as a global society, for one, became global rather than regional, but also moved on from agricultural development to industrial development. And then he predicts that we would move on into an information age. Well, in 1980, Juan Atkins, when he was, I believe, 19 years old that year, he was in a class called Future Studies, ironically in Belleville, Michigan, and discovered the word techno through Alvin Toffler. And the other thing is that Detroit was the seventh city in America and the first to industrialize in the way that it had, and was designed, if you will, by Henry Ford, who at that time was the richest man in the world. So we can, if we move that to modern terms, we should think of this as like if Elon Musk, if Elon Musk wouldn't design a city, which I mean, he's currently trying to do that in Berlin right now with his Tesla factory and the sort of Tesla-velt raves that he's been throwing there. So watch out for that. But same thing with Amazon. I was in Berlin in October and noticed a lot of Amazon Music ads everywhere. They don't do that in America. So, I mean, Europe and Germany specifically is actually about to experience quite a bit of what the future shock that Juan Atkins had gone through. But the other part of that is we have to remember that Jeff Mills and Mike Banks were old. They're old enough to remember the 1967 riots that happened in Detroit, in which the US military was deployed on Black people. And essentially like a guerrilla warfare like broke out across the city, where several of these like Black neighborhoods were destroyed by the military and by white racist mobs. But at that same summer, called the Long Hot Summer, there were over 150 riots in over 150 cities in response to the state-sanctioned murder of Martin Luther King. So the thing is, Jeff Mills was actually in his house with his family as a child, watching tanks be, driven down the street and like, people being attacked by the police. And that's the futuristic imagery that he's talking about. That sort of bonding, that trauma of having experienced state-sanctioned violence like that at a young age is the thing that Mike Banks and Jeff Mills are talking about, that I think Juan Atkins was maybe a little too young to remember. And this is another thing about techno, is that you can see it happening, much like Alvin Toffler brings up in the third wave. There's waves of techno producers that emerge after the civil rights movement, which has led me to refer to techno as a post-civil rights music and a post-civil rights movement. And if you hone in and kind of zone into the civil rights movement itself, music was actually quite a big factor into it. If you think about like the free jazz album from Max Roach called We Insist, which was a Freedom Now suite. But also there's a guy named Don Lewis, who was in Alabama at Tuskegee University at the same time as my aunt and Lionel Richie, who was an organist that played for Martin Luther King's protests. He would actually later go on to be hired as a contract worker by Roland and help design the 808, I believe the 303, wow. And also he designed MIDI, which I know that everyone wants to think that Dave Smith did it in I believe it was like 85, which is actually they presented it down the street from where I live now, on Broadway in New York. But this was actually designed by a Black man named Don Lewis. And these sort of connections, I think are totally missed when people don't engage in Black history, which is something, again, that is happening in America right now with the anti-critical race theory debate, is that there are a lot of right-wingers that refuse under any circumstance to recognize that if you segregate a society, if you enslave a society for 300-400 years and then segregate them for another 100 years, you get a completely counter history, which is why my book is called Assembling a Black Counterculture. It's a culture counter to the dominant one, under which, Europeans would have a more like face-to-face interaction with. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of history there, and I want to just mention a few things, like, for example, the radio moderator Electrifying Mojo, Charles Johnson, who, especially in the late 70s, I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, started this radio station in Detroit, because in Detroit there was this vacuum, kind of, where he could mix musical genres, and somewhere else in the States you couldn't do that so easily. So he used this opportunity to connect like the soul and the funk with new developments from Europe, and also like new wave and such kind of things, and krautrock like Kraftwerk and new kind of electronic music. And this was a kind of a mixture in this radio station, which he called Midnight Funk Association. And this was quite important, I guess, for the development of this kind of special kind of mixture. And
it's funny you bring this up, because I mean, Charles Johnson, Electrifying Mojo, was a military veteran in Vietnam,
Yes.
where he was in Singapore before this happened, which is actually where he was able to purchase a lot of his a lot of these German records. And that's actually where things get really interesting. I mean, I'm glad you actually brought up the sort of musical vacuum that was happening. At that time in American history, a lot of Black music was being sold under the title race records in a completely separate market, which is one of the reasons that Black Americans can trace our music. They're literal ledgers in a completely separate music industry with a separate charting system that we have access to. You can look at the baseball industry as well, in the fact that there's a Negro League, which only as of 2020 have been integrated into the current Major League Baseball League. Or rather, the sort of old historical stats have been integrated into the overall stats of baseball players. But the actual radio station that Electrifying Mojo was at was the first ever Black radio station, Black-owned radio station called Where God's Presence Radiates, which actually kind of, adds to what you're getting at. It's literally, if you think about that as even more so than a metaphor, and Black vernacular is very literal in its myth poetics. Electrifying Mojo in a lot of ways actually is this messianic figure that was able to take the sounds that he I mean, you guys are European, you understand colonialism. He was able to go somewhere else, get some spicy stuff, bring it back home and sprinkle it over the environment and open up a community that was deprived economically, politically. He was able to offer something new. And that doesn't necessarily mean that Kraftwerk's contributions to electronic music, as I like to call them, industry plants that were hired by Roland and other companies to sell electronic gear at a point where these companies were going bankrupt. But it's their Kraftwerk didn't necessarily inspire techno in this literal sense as much as it's being able to hear people that could actually afford all of this electronic equipment. And yeah, Electrifying Mojo was quite important to that. And it's something that I really wish that I had when I was younger.
He was a big influence for Juan Atkins and Derek May, and maybe you know more about it, Upstart.
Everybody I know by person, like Blake, like Jeff, like Robert, like Mike. Everybody told me this radio station really inspired them. Yeah? Also to start their own sound. I mean, it was really a radio station they learned about. It was like funk music, psychedelic funk, like African rhythms, and this crazy electronic stuff from Europe. Yeah. So this was it sounds like a really original, very futuristic mix on a radio station. Yeah, and yeah. So the things went on, like Juan started and Derek May started and so on. They tried to found a new sound, what was totally revolutionary for these days. Yeah, it was a mix. A lot of people say we were influenced by Kraftwerk, but you don't hear it so hard. Maybe African Bambaataa in a way, I would say. And
that's a funny one. I found out actually African Bambaataa actually didn't sample Kraftwerk. They did like a kind of note for note cover and deconstruction, but still had to pay the royalties. But interestingly enough, I actually did not know Kraftwerk was German until around 2008. I thought that they were Black because I had never seen them. Yeah, that was actually really Moody Man. Red Bull Music Academy interview says the same thing, and that's something I've noticed in the exchange between America and Germany is that there's a sort of anonymity to this music. There's a sort of like when I was reading Der Klang der Familie, I noticed that a lot of people were like, this music came from nowhere. They were talking about how they could not see the person and all they could feel were these like this energy. And I think that's something quite interesting about the power of music, regardless of its origin, to
Yes.
to actually speak and admit and to transmit information.
It was kind of transatlantic feedback in somehow, yeah. Stuff from Europe came over, also maybe later EBM, electronic body music stuff, or maybe industrial, maybe minimal music, like, and all this and this techno eat soul music, I would say, and in the harder way, the techno music from Detroit and Chicago that back to us, yeah. So it's
like a ping pong.
It's kind of ping pong, transatlantic feedback. Let's say that. And also, for example, in folk music, you find also immigrant guys who left Europe, Poland, Czech, Bavarians, who escaped to America to have. To fulfill a dream, and there's still some folk blast music in Texas. It's more crazy than here. It's more funny. It's more more innovation. Thank you. Inside, like you find here on Oktoberfest, yeah. But this is a different story. When in the late 80s, like the first records came here over, released by independent labels run by these black people, like who started Metroplex, Underground System, we talked, and etc. And it was a totally new sound for me. Yeah, I didn't heard any Kraftwerk inside that. Yeah, okay. There's a connection when these people said they were totally fascinated by the aesthetic of the sound, how Kraftwerk did it. Yeah, everybody was sad because it was totally futuristic. Yeah, but everybody, every artist is kind influenced by something, yeah. But this was really new and modern, yeah, and so far away from time. Yeah. If you listen to some stuff today, it just sounds brand new and futuristic, still futuristic. Yeah, they're classics, yeah, in music. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think this came to Europe, acid house, and so on. There was some people, for example, Hardwax in Berlin was the first store who started distributing Black American music here in Europe. Yeah. And it became a real big success. And these labels in Detroit and Chicago, they were totally excited what's going on there. Yeah. And then they were invited to play here, and they were I don't know how to say it, they never saw things like that. Crazy people going totally crazy on their music. It didn't happen in white America, yeah, but it happened here. Yeah? And I remember that it was really, really respectful. Yeah. Like it was really, really respectful. It was like we had this kind of nation feeling. I remember 90, 91, these days, the early 90s, it was crazy. Yeah.
This is very interesting because early phase of techno developing in Europe was very hard influenced by those people like Juan Atkinson and the Belleville Three, like you call it, Derek May and Kevin Saunderson, because they were the first people who were invited as live acts in Berlin for the first Tresor parties and stuff. But I heard that, and also you mentioned it, DeForrest, I heard that in the early phase, like till 89, there were like 50% black bookings in the techno scene in Europe, and then it changed. Like it went down to 20%. So the visibility of the innovators, of the black innovators of techno music from Detroit got reduced. Is this true?
Yeah, I mean, this is actually quite an interesting thing because it just makes sense, right? It's, if there are 45 million, I believe it is, Black Americans that are in America and you have about 5 of them leave, and come to Europe where there's, say, another 50 million, people, it makes sense that this visibility would be swallowed up after a while, right? And actually, Marshall Jefferson wrote a really nice essay about this in Mixmag in 2020, where he kind of addresses this, where he's, it's called like Why I Quit DJing. And it was under the premise of, there's three people that have access to electronic gear in America. And then on top of that, you go to a place where there's 23 people from Belgium, there's another 30 people coming from the UK, there's another 50 people in Germany, and you have like a nice closed loop industry that forms out of that. On top of that, I mean, you also have the Dutch who implemented the polling systems, like the sort of DJ polls in the 90s that began to create a sort of valuation system and a stock market for how to, essentially book DJs that the Black producers weren't included in, which again makes perfect sense because we were in another country and we're being exported over. But I mean, I guess that's one of the things that kind of complicates where the industry can go now, is now that we are this, fully global society where, I can literally use technology, Zoom, to come to you all and like make this exchange. It's like, how do we understand and sort of, I don't want to say reckon with, but continue and build infrastructure around this sort of, around these business modelings, which, I mean, to put it frankly, Black producers at this point are rarer, if you will, thusly, we'll say more valuable in the European market and vice versa. And I noticed this actually when I moved to New York, that until around 2014 or so, actually, no, I'll say around 2016, when Donald Trump became president and started kind of messing with the artist visas and various like immigration visas, you would actually have quite a number of, like a high number of European producers that would come over, producers and DJs that would come over to New York and to America, which obviously kind of made it harder for local DJs and producers to play on the stages in New York. But, and I think this is, and now that, the borders have tightened up a bit in America, there's been a lot of room for producers and DJs and for a scene to actually grow and to develop and attempt to financialize itself. Not that I believe in financialization in any way, shape, or form, but we live in a capitalist society and no one's going to do the cultural revolution necessary. So here we are. And it's as having worked at Mixmag as an editor, having written for RA, resident advisor at times, and DJ Mag and such, I've always tried to propose a way to even this scale by simply telling the story, if you know what I mean, by going back across the 20, 30 years of this sort of globalized industry structure and attempting to actually reformat it in a very empirical way, as opposed to, I mean, a lot of people choose to go, well, that was the past, it's whatever now. And a lot of my logic with this is actually kind of taking things back to square one, when in, Juan Atkins' maybe second interview ever in the magazine Music Technology, he defines techno as music that sounds like technology, not music that is simply made with technology.
Yeah. That's also a very, very interesting
I mean,
quote.
taking things,
Interesting quote.
Yeah, it is really interesting.
Techno is music that sounds like technology and not technology that sounds like music. Meaning that most of the music you listen to is made with technology, whether you know it or not. But with techno music, you know it. That's a quote from Juan Atkins. Yeah. I like his quotes actually. And I realized that's what I didn't realize all the years long, that there is a political statement behind the music. And that's why I didn't go along with it so well, because I didn't know it actually. And I realized it very, very late. Maybe you can tell us more about the political perspective of techno music in Europe, how you saw it. And Peter.
A title by the hypnotist, My House, your house is my house is what it was? My house is your house, and your house is my house. So
Yeah.
all my black friends, they had to sleep in our house and not at the hotel.
Yeah.
And I like that. We stayed together, and was in the early days, it was totally normal that the DJ stay in the house of the promoter. And we became friends in a way, and a lot discussions. What I wanna, other story about, because in the early 90s, okay, techno exploded here in Europe, in Germany. Wall fell down, these open spaces, clubs like Tresor, Planet, etc. It was really crazy. A new time with a new sound, with a new ecstasy and ecstasy. Yeah? And
When did you start Ultraschall, by the way?
we started in '91. The first parties
91.
were
It's also very
Ultraworld
early.
in a punk rock place.
Very early.
One of the funniest things was that punks came to me, hardcore punks, and told, "This is not music. And it will be gone
This
soon."
happened in
Really?
America as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, this actually happened. It was.
This is
that's
noise.
actually
This is not
part of the
music.
story that I think is missed. Yeah,
It's a trend.
yeah. There were actually a lot of. There were a lot of punk rockers that protested Derek May's sets initially in Detroit.
Very interesting.
Yeah, and it was the same like
Yeah,
when we
and this is a
were
common thing.
punks and new waves, because like I'm born '62, and so the hippies told us when we were listening noise and Soren Grizzly and stuff. And okay, Soren Grizzly, okay, this is not sound. But if they listen to Sex Pistols, this is not music, or Pearl Boo, or these bands, or anyhow Bad Brains and stuff. Anyhow. But maybe a problem was like this first generation who started, like Huyn Atkins, Dave Mayers, Underground Resistance, so and it exploded here. Though there was a lack. I didn't saw a next generation coming up from the States. Chicago started a different style of music, this really hard, funky techno house. But like from Detroit, it was not like, okay, we are so proud what's going on. In USA, I remember Carlos Abraham Duke, called also Kirlia, and he comes from an Ecuadorian family. He lives in Hollis, Queens, New York. He was a resident DJ at Limelight, New York, by the way, where also Jeff Mills and Blake Baxter from Detroit had a residency. Not in Detroit. They had a residency there. Yeah. This was the first place where we went totally crazy in the US, I think, where black people had really great parties and totally success. Yeah.
Limelight's currently a
was
capitalist
not coming
yoga
on,
studio.
and maybe because he told me. The neighborhood, the people in his neighborhood, they always said, "Why you do techno? Why you don't do hip hop? What is such fucking music? It's bad." It was in the black community, but hip hop was the big thing, not techno. In America, they didn't saw what's going on in Europe so much, and also probably in Detroit there was not. Okay, there were illegal warhouse parties, but was not a big thing where you can see a way to start as a musician, independency, and make some money and create your sound. I think it was like how this works is do they sell records, etc. The hip hop guys, it was exploding this time also. Yeah, all this band from Public Enemy to Tribe Called Quest, etc., etc. This was really big, and for the young people, young black in America, I think hip hop was much more a way of this is my sound thing. Yeah.
So what do you think about that? Is this like was this the weakness of the community in Detroit, that they couldn't follow up with the development in Germany, and then it went to somewhere else?
Well, this is where things get interesting with America, and
exactly.
So there were successive financial crashes that happened throughout the 70s and 80s, and again in the 90s. Where you can actually see Ronald Reagan, for one, the guy who went to the Berlin Wall in, I believe it was 1989, and said, Gorbachev, tear down this wall. He implemented a lot of economic practices that directly harmed the Black community by, depriving Social Security benefits, depriving a lot of the healthcare benefits that as Europeans are more accustomed to. And you can actually see economically that white people, the majority, the sort of, actually the most millionaires probably up until around 2020, the most millionaires ever emerged out of the middle class in the 1980s. And they were all predominantly white. But, and to break this down a bit, there are 330 million people in America. 45 million of them are Black. And the vast majority of those people, so I'll say about 300, or maybe I'll say about 200 million of those people are white. So if you can put those numbers together, 45 million Black people versus 200 million white people, that's what we're going up against. And the thing is, actually, again, a few things happened with hip hop. Hip hop, it was actually not that popular in the Black community initially. It was a marketing thing that was done. There's a great book called Rhythm and Business that breaks this down, where essentially the hip hop market, even up until today, is about 60 to 70% white. And that's just due to being, the vast majority.
Excuse me. How much percent? I didn't recover.
60 to 70%
is white.
Yeah, and this is actually a thing that is quite controversial.
You mean the business?
Yes, the listeners and the listeners, the people who purchase and listen. Yeah.
Okay.
The majority of people listening to hip hop for the last 30 years have actually been white Americans.
This is for America. For America.
Yeah, America specifically.
Okay.
And this is something you'll hear Mad Mike talk about if you read. Specifically, there's an interview with Sven Vath in Debug. I think it was around 97 when he did this interview, and he talks about how the radio station suddenly switched. Because remember, Electrifying Mojo was on one of the very few. Well, he was on the first Black-owned radio stations, and thusly one of the few Black-owned and operated radio stations in the country. And we're working in two different industries. But another thing that actually happened was around that time that Jeff Mills got the residency at Limelight, which is now a yoga studio, by the way. He actually, Derek May and Marshall Jefferson were at a conference at the New Music Seminar at the exact same time as the Death Row musicians got into that giant famous brawl that kind of blew up hip hop. And they were discussing with Tony Wilson, the founder of Factory Records and the Hacienda, how techno, they were trying to explain to him basically, and explain to the world, if you will, that techno was in fact from Detroit and was Black. But the sort of, the brawl that happened in the hip hop community at that same conference actually overshadowed the conversation and the financialization of techno in America. But anyway, I say all this to say, the second generation of those techno producers were actually, they came in the form of Carl Craig, Stacy Pullen, Drexia, and that was about it. And a lot of this had to do with, you could actually see around, Underground Resistance played at Tresor in 1992. You can actually see in financial reports that the Black community's wealth gain actually stagnated from 1992 and rose a little bit after the dot-com boom around 2001 and stagnated all the way up until today. Whereas the white population of America suddenly shot up and became excessive millionaires. And you can see it like an almost vertical incline in white wealth across the 90s and 2000s, which that's a few things going on where you have literally white-owned hip-hop labels, major record labels signing artists and promoting their music to specifically white audiences with a sort of trickle-down effect on Black communities. At the same time that large wealth disparity, but also there's two other things I'll mention before I shut up about this. You have then Senator Joe Biden, who's now our president. In 1994, he signed a crime bill that actually resulted in the majority of Black men, and I do mean the actual majority of Black men being put into prison due to small offenses of having, maybe a small amount of weed on them. maybe a little bit of cocaine, and that would put you in jail for 30 years. Joe Biden later on, around 2003, also signed and put forth the RAVE Act, which was a sort of anti-ecstasy, anti-raving act, as it's called, that essentially banned electronic music and raving in America, more or less for good, which is something that's currently still playing out in New York right now. And so there's a things that actually happened that suppressed techno, in which techno actually had to change and had to fall back on this idea of being music that sounded like technology rather than being music made with technology, and especially repetitive beats being played in hedonistic club spaces. And this is where you get into stuff like Drexciya, where it sounds more symphonic, and it sounds, I'll pull out the Drexciya graphic novels here, where you start getting these stories, these comic book stories kind of emerging from the records. And Drexciya never played live. They've never played in a club. And what ends up happening is that techno became a sort of underground art music, if you will, something more similar to the AACM in Chicago than to Tresor in Berlin. But that's where things get complicated, because the music businesses that exist in Europe and America work completely differently. But I think, again, Germany will see these similarities in the coming years now that Billboard has set up a global charting system. And I think Europeans have been lucky to not have to adhere to the Billboard chart system the way that Black Americans have been against the majority Black or white population.
I think.
Yeah.
Yes, I think Upstart wants to say something about about this topic.
Yeah,
right?
let's see development the last years, like what is called in America, this, how they call it techno. It has a stupid name, electric something music.
Like EDM.
EDM, yeah.
Electronic dance.
I can tell you about this.
This is really kind totally artificial fucking thing made from nothing. Yeah, I mean this has nothing to do with techno music. Also, white or black or Native American techno music. It's something was built by an idea on a table on record companies on big rock agencies, because the rock agency saw our business is falling down, so we need a new business. Yeah, and that's coming from this. This is not inspiring, and this is I will talk. This is more the enemy, and not talking about who belongs to music. Yeah, I mean this is the enemy for me. Yeah, and this is a capitalistic thing. Like how also this is like in history in America, black music was not really well taken, respected, promoted by the white record industry and radio station, etc.
Yes.
Yeah, and this is really a problem. This is a main problem. That was. Here it's a little better. Okay, we also have here in Europe totally problems with free speech on etc. In some countries we have, we are happy that we have Zündfunk here, for example. The best radio show who brings black music here by Thomas Meinecke, a white guy. It's cancelled now because too old for the radio station. He did the best radio. I mean, he played all the weirdest new
Thomas Meinecke.
Thomas Meinecke, a Nacht session. Yeah, really a tip. I miss this show really, because he played really jazzy, like the music is not standing still. Yeah?
I guess
going back also in the mid-90s, like there were so many white people here in Europe starting doing techno, very inspired at the beginning, and it was influence. No, it was inflation of music. We're becoming crazy. So much bad stuff. So much bad records. I remember in the record store, oh God, now everybody release. Oh God, another label. Okay, some the great stuff, but all this mass of releases, fucked up the great ones and really original stuff, this fucked up, yeah, because remember me on the days of a new wave, because also in Germany, for example, this Neue Deutsche Welle thing, there were really great bands in the beginning, and then the industry found it, oh, okay, we can do some money with that, and released every shit, and the real origin stuff wie heißt das? Wurde überrollt. I don't know.
They was trampled over.
Yeah, it was trampled over. Yeah. And they had money for promotion and blah, blah, blah. But the great anarchist bands like Abwärts or Der Plan or, okay, Einstürz Neubau is, it's not an example, but like, it was, so the people didn't, now they listen to the stupid Neue Deutsche Welle. Yeah. And the same happened in techno in the mid-90s. Yeah.
Yes.
So also, and also I have to, I want to, as a booker, and a
club owner.
I'm not a club owner. We do it together with. Doing it together with 4 partners, and we are 40 people. And I'm very happy that our club is not like a pyramid in hierarchy, so we are more flat. But I really have to tell you, like the kids who are hungry to dance and wild, and between 18 and 22, let's say, if you talk to them, do you know Detroit? Do you remember Detroit techno? They don't know.
They don't know
if you play Detroit, some stuff of the old stuff, they say this is not techno. This is softy shit. Yeah. Yeah, because they play on 140 PMs noise, unfunky stuff. Yeah, I hope it will go again away. But this is like really and. I mean, for these people, a show like this is maybe interesting, better to listen to the real stuff. But I remember also playing sometimes. I'm not teaching a lot, but sometimes I play classic and people come. Also, it's not, I don't want to say bad words to all the youth. It's also different, yeah. People are interested. But if you only get this white techno trash, no way.
So that's very interesting what you said. I think we all need a bit of knowledge, more knowledge about history, not only musical history, but also the history of ourselves, to understand things really. If the people don't understand the phenomenons that are happening and that are taking them, they can't use it really, effectively. And I think this is what's happening with the music. So maybe we are in charge of putting this topic always on the list again. Maybe it should open some platforms, also in clubs, maybe just to remind the people, also the younger generation, about the history about.
And it's also like this fucking media thing, like clicks. You can buy clicks, yeah. Bookers, club bookers, they invite people because they have a lot of clicks to get the club pack, to make some money. Yeah. So I miss the experience, yeah, and the possibility to experience. Also Munich, the rents here are fucking high.
Yeah.
You need to the fees for the people are higher than somewhere else, and you have to make the money to run the place, yeah. So you can't go in a risk, yeah. Except you get some money from state and so on, yeah. And this is I'm missing to get a chance for unknown people who are totally talented. Yeah, this is really missing. Not a lot of people have the mood, power, the mood, courage. Yeah, and the rich papa behind.
I guess this is why we need to read your book. And we are very, very curious about this publication, because I think also it's very, very important to bring this into the minds of the people, because I talked to Upstart before, years ago, I remember, and Upstart asked me like, you never have been into Detroit techno? And I said, no, I never been, I didn't like it. But now I realize that I have been into it so deeply, because I was breakdancing in underground stations, and one of my favorite tracks was this, what you have also on your playlist. I will post the playlist under the YouTube link from Juan Atkinson, the track called Clear. And this was one of my favorites where I danced to. But this I just linked this under the file of electrofunk, you know. But
Yeah.
now I realize, and I mean it's never too late to learn some things, you know. I realize that this is the origin of it, and I always wondered, for example, when I went to Union Move and stuff, I always wondered about the attitude of the people, because they had a kind of an attitude. All these white guys, they had an attitude, and it looked like a political attitude. So I was very curious and went there, and for hours I stood there and listened to the music, and I wondered, where does this attitude come from?
Secret slogans inside the music, metaphysics, somehow.
But maybe it's the political attitude of such guys like urban resistance.
I mean,
you know?
where's the political attitude in jazz music? It can be like Sun Ra.
It is.
Okay, Sun Ra.
It is.
Yeah.
There
But
is a
like
political
instrumental
attitude.
jazz, for
There is a
example.
political attitude in jazz music, of course. It is.
I can actually add something to this, because for one, I should probably tell you all that I grew up in the same neighborhood as Sun Ra and Angela Davis, and actually I was given the nickname Professor by my grandfather, who basically my grandfather's living in the house of the guy who taught Sun Ra how to play trumpet, and this political attitude you're talking about, there's a term for it called Just Grew, JESGREW, which means that black music just grew. And that term comes from a guy named James Weldon Johnson, who also composed the Black National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing. So there is a sort of politicality that's built into all of our music, because all of it is an emotional eruption that just grew. And that's one of the main things about techno, I think, that has to be understood, at least in its American context, is that it just happened. And that's one of the reasons I had to write this book, by compiling 30 years of liner notes and interviews and watching all these documentaries.
I can imagine.
It took me 2 years, but it all came together to show how this music just grew.
Very, very interesting. And we are at the end of our time, nearly. I'm very, very glad to have this conversation with you, because it opened doors for me personally, and I guess it's very important for the society here, where electronic dance music, as they call it, plays a very, very great role. I want to just mention a quote. Which was very enlightening for me, because now I understand where the term house music comes from.
Thank you for sharing this.
Yeah, the word house. Excuse me, I just want to quote it. The word house comes from a record that you only hear in a certain club. The DJs would search out an import that was as obscure as possible, and that would be a house record. You'd hear a certain record only at the power plant, for example, and that was Frankie Knuckles' house record. It's like a house wine. But you couldn't really be guaranteed an exclusive on an import, because even if there were only 10 or 15 copies in the country, another DJ would track one down. So the DJs came up with the concept of making their own house records. It was like, hey, I know I've got an exclusive because I made the record. Exactly, this is the quote. I found it very interesting. Now I know where the term house music comes from. It's like it's just a statement of making something by himself.
this is why I centralize most of the book and most of my understanding of techno around Juan Atkins, because that particular interview in Music Technology, Juan Atkins actually gives you all the terms. He defined all of it. And Rick Davis and Cybertron actually had a book that they wrote called The Grid, which I don't think anyone has access to, that tells you what all of these like names like Cybertron or Metroplex mean. Yes. And if anything, if I ever have any goal with techno, it's to revert things, not necessarily back to the way that Juan structured it, but to look at what Juan Atkins was thinking about in relation to Alvin Toffler's understanding of business and information age, global economics, and trying to use this as a way to maybe move forward with this economy. You know, it's thinking about what it means for techno to be a music that is produced and for house music to be a music that is cultural and like centered around a location.
Yeah. Yes, thank you very much for Upstart for coming here.
Stop. We have also to talk what music, what this music does an effect. Yeah, we talk about where this music come from. Maybe we are not to the end. And also
we can go
really
on
develop.
Go on for half an hour.
Twin, there were Reflex Record, there were the people from Roma. There's fucking great experimental music, ambient around, made by a lot of great, talented women from all the world. Yes. And so this is, it's not stopped. What we can say, some music, it's now over 30 years techno. I feel like a rock and roll guy was looking like this, but we are not. This techno music is a little crazy. Some sounds totally modern. What I want to say, it's like what this music made effects and brought so many people together worldwide. It's a totally. It's not. It's always a story about classes and rich and poor, but this music brought so much people in a short time together that no other music, I would say. Yeah, and this is worldwide. Okay, respect to some founders, of course, but you can't stop music, and it's going around the world, and this is great. This is fucking great.
Of course, it's great, but isn't it important to know about the founders, like you said before too?
Of course, the founders have to make them visible. Of course, yeah.
Just to make them visible, because otherwise you have such statements like I read about or under the post of Neigungsgruppe Musik in Zündfunk. There's one guy wrote a comment like. He said okay, maybe the founders was black, but they used white computers. And these are statements, they are so stupid. And these stupid statements just can happen because the most of the people who love this music don't know about the roots of the music. So I think
they don't know a black guy made those instruments.
We are in charge to make the people know and to insist in them to acknowledge themselves. This is something I think we have to do.
We can also fix the industry with those quotes that you read off. And that's kind of my point with Juan Atkins. It's not even so much about centralizing this thing back in Detroit. It's actually thinking about, as Peter kind of pointed out, what the music does and its effect, and the thing is, techno was intentional. It was meant to go global this way. I don't think. And it's actually quite important to know that Juan Atkins was not only reading a book about global economics and industry, but he was also reading music business books. And that's the thing, the financialization that happened with this music is actually quite counter to the structure that it was initially made for. And in a situation where we have, a global pandemic that takes the entire dance music industry, which was worth $7.4 billion in 2019, and knocks it down by, to $3.4 billion the next year, and actually at the International Music Summit reports, techno is actually declining, or dance music as a whole is declining in interest and financially all across the world, except for in Germany, which I actually attest a lot of this to the presence of Amazon Music and Elon Musk in Germany, this increase. And so it's a thing where as you all begin to be faced with the same economic factors that actually affected and stole techno in the first place, if you will, it's actually quite important to look back to what Juan Atkins was saying, because I think both Juan Atkins and Matt Mike specifically, because I think that would be a way to maintain and to sort of assuage the frustrations that I'm hearing from Peter about the younger generation and about, running clubs in a flat and non-hierarchical manner. The infrastructure was already there, and I think it's important to really to recognize that techno or electronic dance music as a whole is about to be financialized in an AI-oriented market in which DJs will essentially not be of value. You can look at, people like Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst who live in Berlin above Hardwax, who lecture about this stuff, as kind of proof of this. We can look at Spotify and, Daniel Ek's financialization of music and how he pays artists 0.00038 cent on the dollar or per stream, to listen to music. So it's one of those things where, I definitely don't want to stifle progress in the past, but there's something about the baseline of this industry that becomes very important as Germany itself is about to accelerate into the future by the hands of two white American technocrats.
Now, I think I would like to mention a wish. If you publish your book, we would like to have you as a guest here. And I think it would be very interesting to use a stage like Rote Sonne or anything, import-export or so, to have you physically here, to introduce the book and to talk about it again. Also, there are a lot of issues that I wanted to discuss, but I think it's very, very long if you start with that. I found it very interesting, the connection between those, this atmosphere in Detroit, for example, in this industrial Detroit, and the connection to this after wall tearing down Berlin.
The inflation that's been experienced in the 30 years after that.
This is a very, very interesting issue.
It's connected.
Yeah, it's very, very, and Germany and America is very, very well connected in these issues. I mean, it's also very interesting, like a hip-hop act like Houdini come to Conny Plank to produce an album and stuff, and this is very interesting, and I would like to talk with you both and with other people also a lot more about this topic. And I hope when your book comes out in summer that we meet in Munich and we can have a discussion and we can meet physically. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I'm a big fan. For one, I should say this. I'm a big fan of Disko B. I didn't realize I was going to be talking to the founder of that today. Huge fan of Don't DJ and whatnot. But no, I mean, that's what I'm here for. I'm very much interested in continuing these conversations as someone who has been fired from music magazines for trying to tell the story over the years. Someone who has actually been financially impacted. And, my livelihood having been impacted by this whitewashing of the industry. And it's more or less my goal to work towards this new infrastructure against the capitalist technocrats that has completely ravaged the American music landscape. And, and I see them. I was in Berlin, in October. I was in Poland around the same time. And I see the actual, the future shock that is happening over there. And want to help. Like, that's the thing. I actually want to stop Jeff Bezos. I want to stop Elon Musk from financializing all of these things. And it's thank you for having me for this talk. It's very it's very meaningful to me.
Great, thank you. Thank you also very much. Thanks to Kammerspiele München and to Markus. Markus, who sits on the technician, who is also Klaus. Sorry, I'm sorry.
Thanks, Klaus.
Klaus Möbius.
He started at Rote Sonne, by the way.
His
two jobs.
He's also organizing techno parties, actually. Huh. And he could also tell us a lot about the very young techno scene.
Difficult.
Okay, so we have to. I think we should close the session right here. It's quite long for Habibi Kiosk Dies Das. I'm very glad to have you as guests, and I'm very glad to have you as audition. And I think
we could do it longer. If we could play some tracks. Yeah,
yeah, this would be great.
We
actually.
talk so.
That would
Oh
be
yes,
great.
this would be
The
great.
music is missing.
Good wine,
so we could do the whole
music, and talking about music.
Yeah.
That's great.
And
This would be nice.
This is techno.
This is techno, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so wish you a good night, everybody. Good evening, and
So we do it next time.
yeah, greets to Alabama, New York, and Detroit, and have a nice time. See you soon, hopefully.
Cheers.
Thank you.